If a man has spent 48 years waiting to die, hasn't he already paid the ultimate price? And should a nation still pull the lever on a man who once wore its uniform with honor? A decorated Vietnam veteran now shackled by a crime committed nearly half a century ago? This isn't just a case, it's the longest-running death sentence in American history. A haunting tale where the lines between justice and vengeance blur, and time itself becomes a silent judge. On the bitter morning of January 13, 1976, the quiet town of Harrison County, Mississippi, was shaken by a crime that would echo across 5 decades. Richard Gerald Jordan, just 29 years old at the time, had returned home from Vietnam with medals on his chest and wore ghosts in his mind. But honor didn't pay the bills. Jobless and drowning in despair, Jordan made a desperate decision that would define the rest of his life. He planned to kidnap the wife of a local banker, hoping ransom money would be his salvation. The day before, he de-scoped out his target by calling Gulf National Bank and learning the name of Charles Marter. The next morning, dressed as a utility worker, Jordan arrived at the Marter residence, where 34-year-old Edwina Marter was caring for her young son. Forcing her to leave her sleeping child behind, Jordan drove her deep into the silent, shadow-drenched DeSoto National Forest. There, in a cold, remote clearing, he shot her in the back of the head with a .38 revolver. But the crime didn't end. There was only the beginning. Hours later, Jordan made a chilling phone call to Charles Marter, demanding $25,000 in exchange for his wife's safe return, knowing full well she was already dead. The police set a trap. That same evening, Jordan was arrested while attempting to collect the ransom. In a full confession, he led investigators to Edwina's lifeless body, to the murder weapon, to the ransom cash. The evidence was overwhelming. There were no questions, no mysteries, just cold, brutal facts. And yet what followed was not swift justice. It was a legal labyrinth, a half-century of courtroom battles, reversals, retrials, and constitutional debates. Jordan was first sentenced to death in August 1976. But changing laws and a landmark Supreme Court ruling soon overturned it. 3 more times, the state would fight to have him executed. 3 more times, fate, flaws in the system, or evolving judicial standards would intervene. For nearly 5 decades, Richard Gerald Jordan has lived in the twilight between life and death, never absolved, never executed. His guilt has never been in question, but after 48 years of waiting to die, is the punishment still justice, or has it become something darker? What happens when a man spends nearly 50 years not just awaiting death, but reliving the moment that changed everything every single day? Richard Gerald Jordan isn't just an inmate. He's become a living symbol of the cracks in America's justice system, a man entombed in a cycle of legal vengeance that seems less about justice and more about bureaucracy, his refusal to admit its flaws. His case, the longest-running death row saga in U.S. history, morphed into a haunting tale of time, trauma, and transformation. Jordan was no career criminal. At 20, he proudly enlisted in the U.S. Army and survived 3 brutal tours in Vietnam. 33 months in a jungle that broke bodies and minds. He returned home decorated but damaged, with an invisible wound the world couldn't yet name. PTSD. With no support, no therapy, and no clear path. The war within him spiraled into a desperate, tragic act, the kidnapping and murder of Edwina Marter in 1976. That crime led to his first death sentence, but it wouldn't be his last. In the decades that followed, Jordan's case became a legal purgatory. His first sentence was overturned. So was the second. A third attempt collapsed under the weight of suppressed evidence. Each time, courts found errors, unconstitutional procedures, flawed jury instructions, vital facts hidden from view. At 1991, both sides tried to end the torment with a plea deal. Life without parole. It in a cruel twist. Mississippi law at the time didn't even allow that sentence, so it was tossed out. The system pulled Jordan back under, sentencing him to death for a 4th time in 1998. That sentence, unbelievably, still stands. Through all of this, Jordan changed. He became a model inmate: no violence, no major infractions, mentoring others, working trusted prison jobs, quietly enduring the unending psychological torture of solitary confinement. And only in 2023, nearly half a century too late, did the system finally acknowledge his PTSD. The very thing that might have spared him from death was never considered during his trials. It didn't have a name back then, so it was ignored like so many veterans whose battles continued long after the war ended. Today, Jordan is not the man who killed Edwina Marter. He is a frail 79-year-old who spent nearly 50 years behind bars. Once more, the clock ticks toward death. But this time, mercy weighs heavier than ever before, not just for the man who waits, but for the conscience of a country still unsure how to balance justice with compassion. On May 1st, 2025, the Mississippi Supreme Court set the date, June 25th, 6 o'clock p.m. sharp. At that hour, it's inside the sterile chambers of Parchman Prison. The state plans to end the life of Richard Gerald Jordan, man it has pursued for execution for nearly half a century. The court's order, cold and clinical, reads like countless before it. It declares that all legal avenues are exhausted. But in truth, some questions refuse to be buried. Some wounds, no matter how old, never close. On May 21st, a final plea was sent in emergency appeal to Justice Samuel Alito of the U.S. Supreme Court. Jordan's attorneys argued not for innocence, but for fairness. They say he was denied an independent mental health expert, something the court has recognized as a constitutional right. They highlight what could no longer be ignored. Jordan's diagnosis of combat-induced PTSD, a condition undiagnosed during his trials, but ever present in his life since Vietnam. The man who pulled the trigger in 1976 was not merely a criminal, he was a broken soldier, shattered long before he took a life. And yet that truth was never shown to the juries who decided his fate. The highest court has yet to respond. But time is not waiting. If the execution proceeds, Mississippi has 4 methods at its disposal: lethal injection, nitrogen hypoxia, the electric chair, or a firing squad. Each one, in its own way, is a reflection of a nation unsure how to kill without looking cruel. Lethal injection, once seen as clean and humane, has become unreliable, even barbaric. Nitrogen hypoxia, used just once in U.S. history, is experimental and legally controversial. And so the debate shifts from methods to morality. We ask how to execute, but avoid asking why. Jordan's defenders don't deny his crime. They don't pretend Edwina Marter wasn't murdered or that her family didn't suffer. But they argue that justice must evolve. That a man who has spent nearly 5 decades in isolation, who is reformed by every measurable standard, who suffers from war-borne traumas, such a man should not be put to death in his final years. They say he has paid a price few can fathom. And they ask, with solemnity, whether his death now would be justice or just vengeance delivered too late. Veterans who served beside Jordan speak with quiet anguish. They don't excuse his crime, but they understand the ghost of war. They remind us that the nation asked Jordan to fight, to kill, to survive in a place that stripped men of their souls. And when he came back broken, the country turned away. In 1976, PTSD didn't exist in the legal lexicon. Today, it is recognized across courtrooms as a powerful mitigating factor, and yet Jordan's jurors never heard those words. Still, the story is not without its other voice, the voice of the victim's family. For them, this execution is not vengeance, it is resolution, a conclusion long denied. They have waited nearly 50 years to see justice delivered for the life that was stolen. To them, the endless appeals have only reopened wounds that never had a chance to heal. And now, as the hour nears, they ask, if not now, when? And so, we reach the collision point, where justice meets mercy, and the system must choose not between right and wrong, but between 2 agonizing truths. In Parchman, Jordan is no longer the man he once was. He is old, quiet, and respected. He helps prison staff, guides younger inmates, and has gone decades without a serious infraction. His life is one of structure and repentance, not violence or chaos. But does that justify sparing him? The answer lies not just in laws or rulings, but in what we believe justice should mean in the modern age. Is it about the finality of punishment or the potential for transformation? Nearly 50 years after the crime, Jordan's life is no longer defined by that single, horrific act, but by the extraordinary, unsettling question it has left behind. When justice takes half a century, does it lose its edge? or does it gain perspective? As the final days draw near, the execution of Richard Gerald Jordan will become more than a sentence. It will be a national moment of reflection, a test of who we are and who we want to be. A reckoning not just with crime and consequence, but with compassion and change. Because in the end, the real question may not be whether Jordan deserves to die. It's whether, after 48 years of waiting, America still remembers how to let someone live.